So welcome to the Everyday Heroes podcast. I'm Philip Brady, and I'm joined by what I hope is a friend, hope is a colleague, just a delightful person that I met probably this year or maybe into last year. And I'm delighted that Annika McGivern has taken time out of a busy calendar and a busy schedule to have a conversation today. So more or less, Annika, the one-liner on this podcast is I'm going to try and interview people that you could be beside in the queue in Sainsbury's or Tesco and not realize how inspiring the person beside you is, so that it shows people the possibility that they could be inspiring other people and that they can be the hero in their own story too. So just a quick thank you for taking time out today as well. And I appreciate your time and I appreciate everything that you do. And I'm looking forward to this conversation as well. So welcome to the Everyday Heroes podcast.
Thank you. And there's no hope about it. We were absolutely friends and colleagues. Delighted to be here.
Nice. I'm glad. And maybe just firstly, for anybody listening, just tell us a little bit about you. So what's going on for you in your life? What kind of chapter are you in and writing at the moment for yourself? And just in general, what's going on for you? And a short introduction.
Yeah, so in terms of chapters of where I am in my life, I suppose I am sort of out of that sort of major schooling and education chapter that often takes up a big chunk of your 20s or longer, right? Depending on when you come to school, and into very much a chapter of career building, business building, network building, skill building, in kind of like a very practical sense. So to zoom out and give that a bit more context, my work is as I suppose, sport performance exercise psychology coach. And I came to that career path through my own experience of being an equestrian athlete and struggling a great deal with my own mind and anxiety around that, and then needing to reach out for help to a sports psychologist who was able to help me very quickly and very effectively in a way that totally blew my mind and really sparked my own interest, which then turned into passion, as so often happens, for like psychology and mental skills and understanding the mind. And that really led me to then to studying psychology, to then specifically studying sport, exercise, and performance psychology, and then starting my own business. So it's been a wild ride, but it's pretty cool to be at a point. I suppose I'm 3 years into the business now. And so I am at a point where I feel like I've learned a lot. It's happening. Sometimes I still have to remind myself, like, yeah, okay, it's happening, because it's something that was a dream for so long. So it's very cool to be living it. And yeah, so that's what this chapter is all about, like figuring out how to take what I've done already and keep growing it, I suppose, and keep getting better and keep moving forward.
Nice. And you said the kind of struggle, I guess, as an equestrian athlete led you to that. Was that the kind of call, or was there other kind of things that were cropping up for you that actually this like helped you decide this is the kind of path that I'm curious and want to grow into? Or what was that kind of, can you say a little bit more about what that kind of initial nearly invitation to know this is the road or the adventure that I want to go on for myself?
Yeah, it was probably preceded by another call and another adventure, interestingly, which was to pursue equestrian sport and to travel internationally to do that and work for international level riders. So that was the first really strong call that I had, and that was born out of my huge passion and love for equestrian sport and horses. So I felt that call very strongly after graduating high school. Interestingly enough, my high school at the time, I think they offer it now, but at the time there wasn't any psychology classes or anything. So I'd had zero exposure to psychology. I'm not even sure if I really knew what it was when I graduated high school. But so my world was very much shaped by my passion and love for equestrian sports. So I followed that call, and probably part of that too was just I've always loved traveling. So I found a way really to combine those two things. And I moved initially to Ireland to work for a professional show jumper in County Clare. And then after that, moved to Australia to work for two different Olympic level 3-day eventers, which was the sport that I grew up in. And then then came back, and then was moved to America to again work for another professional equestrian there. So that was my first big adventure those years. It was a lot of traveling, a lot of challenges. I was quite young, I was sort of 18, 19, 20 as it was all happening. And so there's a lot to learn about myself, a lot of maybe, I was gonna say toughening up, but I don't know if that sounds right, but it's just, just like a lot to learn about yourself and the world. And so that experience very much fed into, I can see so clearly now with hindsight, sort of led me to where I am now, because it was only through that experience that I was really, really pushed to the kind of edges, far, far, far edges of my comfort zone, which was then where things were difficult. And I was sort of struggling with my anxiety. I was putting huge, huge, huge pressure on myself. And my performance was not doing well as a result. So when I was in America, I had a new horse, and we were moving up to a level that I had been it had just been like the big goal for a long time to get to this level. So a huge amount of pressure, just from me, just from myself. And that experience turned into, when we can go into more detail if you like, but basically the pressure and everything that I was going through mentally led to me not riding as well as I could have. And then I ended up falling off twice in 2 major competitions. And then it was like I completely forgot how to ride overnight. I just couldn't see, I couldn't see a distance, we call it, when you're jumping a horse, you want to be able to see the takeoff point. I stopped being able to see the takeoff point. My horse started stopping, which was really scary because he loved to jump. So then I was stuck in the story of, I've broken my horse. I've forgotten how to ride. My dreams are crashing down around me. And it was a really difficult place. And so then reaching out for help, then having a sports psychologist help me understand how I was shaping my own reality in that moment, how my own narrative, my own beliefs, and my own incredible levels of perfectionism and self-criticism were basically creating a problem, was mind-blowing, because I'd never been taught to see it from that perspective before. And so the call to sports psychology was very much ignited, I think, in that one experience of having my mind opened to this whole other world, it felt like, which was the mental world of sport and performance, and recognizing how powerfully making a change there could impact your actual physical performance and results. And that it just blew my mind. And then, as I said, it was like an incredible curiosity and interest is how it started. And then I think, actually, it's funny, I just realized this now, but I think too, like I've always had I've always loved people and working with people, and I think had an urge to just help people in some way. And so I think that possibly this work also kind of tied in really well with that part of me. And yeah, just through a series of events, then it just became very clear to me that this was the thing I wanted to pursue. I wasn't exactly sure how I was going to do it, because becoming a sports psychologist is not a clear path, really. Still very much an emerging field. But I suppose I just started taking one step after another and made it. Here I am today.
Amazing. And that kind of, you could say, the anxiety or those kind of challenging times, the horse probably picked up on it too.
Oh,
and
definitely.
it just kind of self-reinforces the reducing performance when actually you want it to be performing well. But I've heard anyway about horses being so intuitive about that kind of stuff that you nearly pick up the energy from the other.
Yeah, horses are herd animals, so they're programmed to be always reading basically like the activation levels of all the other like mammals around them, because if one horse sees a threat and then activates, basically, then all the rest of them immediately pick up on that, and then they're able to all escape with the herd. So yeah, they're always picking up on our nervous system, basically. So our nervous system is basically kind of regulating the horse's nervous system. There's actually really cool research that shows that so what they did is that they got a rider to just hand walk their horse down this pathway, And they told the rider, okay, just be prepared, because at the end, this person's going to jump out with an umbrella and like pop the umbrella in the horse's face, right? So just, hang on to your horse. And so they didn't actually do that. They got down to the end. Nobody actually did that. But in anticipation of that, the rider's heart rate increased, and then the horse's heart rate increased in exact tandem with that. So yeah, there's a really strong connection there. And that's why it's really extra important for equestrians to be able to manage their own nervous system, because it has that spin-off effect.
And I noticed the same with Elvis when I'm walking him, that if I'm calm when, let's say, a dog is barking at him, he'll pick up the signal from me to say, oh, okay, it's okay to be calm.
Yeah.
And it's crazy how it works, because you can see him kind of look at me for approval, or like, what are we doing here? What's your response going to be to this situation, Dad? Because I'm not sure what's going on. But he just then lies and is really passive and allows the dog to bark at him or whatever. But the kind of system and nervous system regulation you're talking about as well, like I've been looking at ways to build that into corporate. So if you have a board meeting or a presentation or decision making or strategic thinking to do, and your nervous system is in chaos, what are the things that'll take you to coherent? It's really powerful. It's so cool, that kind of space. And I think we're learning more, but growing it more within that kind of business space where we're actually paying attention to things that aren't just in the mind, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
It
so
is.
tell me about that kind of journey, because that's a big shift. And so I'm going to make assumptions, but like when your confidence takes a knock, but somebody kind of shows you a path or an alternative way of framing that situation, but then triggers the journey to explore this for yourself, and pairing that with wanting to help people. Was there hesitation to do that? Because that's a separate identity or a different version of who you were going to become, let's say, for that. So how did you make sense of that, like hesitation or like commitment to making that call?
So interestingly, one very significant thing happened that basically made it so that I wasn't really going to be able to pursue the original dream in the way that I'd planned. So the horse that I had been able to purchase with a great deal of help from a family member, because competitive horses are pretty pricey. He actually was an amazing horse, but he developed arthritis in both of his back legs.
Oh.
So the joint in their back leg is called the hock. And when the conformation of the horse is such, so the bone structure of the horse is such that the angle that the hock, the joint works at, much like our own knees, right? Like if we don't have enough bend in our knees, then that joint gets more wear. So just the way his body was built, he was a little bit more predisposed to this, and it developed much faster than anyone thought it would, even if and they weren't even sure if he would get it, but he did, and it came on quite early. So what that meant was that he just wasn't physically capable. He wouldn't have been comfortable jumping the height of the jumps that I wanted to go on and jump. And sadly, that he was capable of, but in his healthy body, but wasn't then. So that was really difficult because he was kind of my one shot at it, or it felt like it at the time. And when that happened, of course, his value basically halved overnight, because now he's not able to compete at the level. So I had the option basically of selling him and then using what he was now worth to purchase a much younger horse, which would have meant investing at least another 3 to 5 years to get back to the level I was at, or something else, right? Like changing paths. And so it was really, really hard. It was really devastating. And actually only really recently realized like how incredibly hard it was, because it felt like putting down my biggest dream ever, right? And basically saying, right, I'm giving up on this, or I have to give up, or whatever it was, I'm not going to do it, right? And so it was hard not to feel like I'd failed, and like it had all been for nothing. And so in a way, I suppose like having that spark of interest in sports psychology kind of was like a lifeline for me too. It was like, okay, this dream is crumbling, but at least there's this other thing that I'm excited about. And I think I saw it as a way to still stay involved in the industry, but maybe in a different way. And maybe as a way that still through staying involved, that I would maybe be able to find my way back to competing one day, which is still my intention. The lovely thing about equestrian sport is that it's not age restricted. There's people in their 50s and 60s still competing,
Oh, I
yeah.
didn't know that. That's amazing.
Yeah. There's a phenomenal, a Canadian show jumper called Ian Miller, who has been winning major international competitions well into his 60s. Now, not that that's not, there's not necessarily many, but basically what it says is I knew that I could absolutely come back to riding so this was all in my early 20s that this was happening. I was like 21. And I kind of knew, I was like, look, even if I take, 10 or 15 years to get back to this, like I'll still be in my 30s and I can 100% pick this up again. Maybe with a career to support me to be able to reinvest in myself and get the type of horse that I need to do it. Right. So that was kind of how I reworked the dream in my head.
Amazing.
Yeah. And it was a lifeline. It was like, right, okay, that's gone, but this is now, I think, what I want. And so I sold my horse, and I used that money to go back to university, and just started on the process of that whole new direction.
And it's mad how changing the time frame reduces the feeling of, no, it's never going to happen again. Whereas if you'd only given yourself a year, it wasn't going to be possible within that time frame. But when you extend it, because the age restriction isn't there, it becomes possible. It's really cool. I really like that.
And we're lucky that way in equestrian sport, because a lot of sports you don't have that extended time frame. So we are very blessed with that. Yeah.
Amazing. It's crazy. So when you were pivoting, how did you, or like who was along the way that kind of helped you with that journey? And that's also kind of your part of that too, because that's a brave move to be making as well. So you're kind of supporting yourself through that too. But did you have somebody kind of mentoring you or giving you advice along the way or checking in with you, or what was that like for you?
So funnily enough, the sports psychologist that I reached out to is a man called Dave Fries. And he the reason I knew of him and reached out to him was that he had delivered some workshops to I'd been at sort of different young rider camps and stuff, like provincial camps, leading, in my late teens. And he had been brought in to do different workshops with us. And funnily enough, I'd always found it vaguely interesting at that time, but it wasn't until I desperately needed it myself that I fully understood the magic of it. And I suppose before graduating high school, I had what I realized now was quite a smooth ride through the sport. I always had good horses. I always did well. I was never like, we had to work hard for it, but I didn't experience the level of struggle that then happened later. And so I always thought, oh yeah, that was kind of cool, but never really bought into it, I suppose. But then when I did hit that crisis, Dave was immediately the first person I thought of then. I was like, oh, maybe this is when you actually really need this stuff. So I reached out to him. He was able to help me very quickly and effectively. And Dave has become one of the most incredible mentor figures in my life. So he then proceeded to mentor me through my entire process of schooling and learning and accumulating the hours to apply for membership to the Canadian Sports Psychology Association. He brought me out with him on many his work with athletes. He has given me countless free hours of his time doing case consultations, talking through things, talking about business strategy. Like, it still actually like blows my mind how incredibly generous he has been with me. He's helped me believe in myself. He's always told me he sees something in me that he, that he knows I'm meant for this work, like, which is amazing to hear from someone that you respect and look up to and can give you a lot of confidence in yourself. So he's been, I always feel just indescribably lucky to have had him in my life and for him to have been willing to give back to me in that way. And he just always says, I don't want anything for it. I just want you to pay that forward and do it for someone else one day, which I take very much to heart and have started mentoring now as a result of that. So he's a huge figure. another really key person, or two people actually. So my first competitive riding coach is a really wonderful lady, Brandy Saunders, who I grew up with in the Kootenays in British Columbia, and she's just been a huge support of me through my whole life, and really supports my business now, brings me in to work with her riders a lot, and has been wonderful. And then another riding coach, Jane Stone, is someone I worked for all through my as I was sort of in that period where I was transitioning and finding out that Ringo Starr, my horse, had he was named after the Beatles drummer. Pretty cool. Had the arthritis and everything. And so she was very influential in helping me really latch onto that new path. And I clearly remember her saying to me, you know what, Annika, if I could go back and study again, I would go back and do sports psychology. And that really helped give me the confidence also to choose that path.
Nice.
So yeah, to be honest, whenever I think about this, like, I've been incredibly blessed in my life with mentors. There's other people, but in the context of this particular story, yeah, I think those three people really stand out.
Amazing. And like that, to be able to honor them with your work now in a way is really powerful too. So yeah, that's amazing. I'm sure they'll appreciate being called out on something like this. So yeah, that's amazing. But it's also not easy all the time, right? On that kind of path. So what are some of the challenges that you've encountered committing to that kind of journey for yourself to go into that world? But also sometimes it's easier to go backwards and not kind of continue to move forward. So how do you navigate that for yourself? Like, what keeps you moving forward, and what are some of those maybe challenges that have come up for you as you've kind of pivoted in your career?
I think the biggest challenge was the lack of clarity around exactly what it was all going to look like. It would be, for example, people would ask, how, especially in your early 20s, everyone's always asking you, like, what are you doing? What are you in school for? What are you working towards, right? And so I would say to people like, oh, I'm becoming a sports psychologist. And people would be like, what's that? And I would have to try and explain it. And sometimes I would feel this kind of like dread of like, is this a real thing? Like, is this a real career? I knew there were people doing it. I knew it was a real thing, but it was this question of like, is this something I can do? It seemed so niche and so specific and so vague in terms of how one actually, gets there. Sometimes that there was this real voice of doubt in my mind often. Just going like, are you sure? Like, are you making this up? Like, and I guess what kept me going through that, I guess just, the power of at least seeing a few people who were doing it, the fact that I saw my mentor, Dave, have a successful business doing it. So there was enough proof, I think, to hang on to. And then just sort of my own stubborn determination to just do it, I guess. Which is probably driven by the passion that I have for it. So that was a big struggle. That then culminated in a really interesting way when I so it was all very much, for a long time, I was like, the goal, the finish line was completing the masters. And so when I completed the masters and I got to the finish line, I did have a moment where I was like, oh dear, like, what do I do now? Now I have to start a business. And that realization kind of crashed down on me because I hadn't fully appreciated that. And if I could go back, and if there's anyone listening to this who's thinking about following a similar path, my biggest advice would be like, start learning about business early. Don't wait until you're done your master's, because I either hadn't fully appreciated that, or had been stressed enough about it that I'd been pushing it away. And so hadn't really looked at just how does one start a business and what does that look like. So then when it came to doing that, and it was like, you have to do this now, or there's no other option, that was incredibly scary. So there was a good 6 months to a year of just forging ahead into what felt like total darkness. It felt like I was building something out of thin air or nothing, like it was incredibly intangible sometimes. Also the pandemic kicked in right in the middle of that, which was interesting. So yeah, that was a big challenge. So having to really, really walk the talk and get my own mindset right and build that self-belief, even in the absence of evidence that it was going to be okay, was a really critical thing that helped me through that time. And learning and forcing myself nearly to adopt this new identity of business owner, which felt deeply uncomfortable to adopt. But I had to nearly like force myself into that identity and be like, no, this is who you are. So what are we doing? And yeah, that was tough. And it was one of the biggest challenges I think I've ever been through.
And it's interesting, even the language you use, so navigating darkness, because if we go back to a hero's journey, the cave is what the bottom part of it is called, which is where those challenges, darkness, doubts, all those kind of stuff happen. And that's the language they use in that journey, is the cave. So when you say navigating darkness, like it's exactly that journey. And when you were there, so how did you support yourself there? So it's difficult, it's navigating darkness. Like, how do you look after yourself in those moments? And like that you said about getting your mindset right so that you could do and equip other people to do the same. What is it that you focus on when you're in those moments so that you can kind of like continue to move forward?
So one thing I had to really tackle, which I'd been working on for a while, but was my own perfectionism. That was a major problem. So there was a few things that helped me tackle that. So one, I was sort of meeting regularly with my mentor, Dave, and he, the way that he does the work, he's really fabulous. He has all these cards with images and he like talks to the cards. And so he'd always say to me, you know, Annika, look, you know, and he's a very straight talker. He was like, look, if we can't do the work for ourselves, we have no business helping other people. And I do really believe that, right? Like, if you can't figure this out for yourself, not necessarily alone, like by all means with help and support and from a mentor and a coach, but if you can't do that work with support, then we don't have any business providing that support to other people because we don't know it intrinsically. So he would always say to me, you know, Annika, it's on the cards. Like when you're in doubt, like you've got to come back to the cards, which is his set of like, you know, wisdom around it all. But there's one particular model that he taught me that really kind of looks at perfectionism, where basically it's recognizing that anytime that your expectations and your reality fall out of sync, we experience some kind of negative emotion around that, right? So the problem with being a perfectionist is that your expectations are always based around this ideal of perfection. And so then you experience really intense emotions like shame or guilt or anger or frustration or sadness when you feel you haven't met that standard. And so that cycle then of negative emotion can keep you stuck and paralyzed and doubting and in the wrong mindset. So I had to figure out how to let go of my own perfectionism, which had been a huge thing for me in my life. And I had to figure out, like many perfectionists, I had seen the perfectionism as one of the good things about my character that actually drove me to do more and succeed. And a lot of perfectionists feel that way, right? Like if I, like, it's good that I hold myself to these standards. If I didn't, God knows what would happen. And I have people say that to me all the time, you know, when I work with clients on this, it's like, if I let this go, like, what if I just watch Netflix for 24 hours and don't move? You know, like, what will I just become like a lazy blob on the couch? So when we think that way, we're forgetting that fear is not the only motivator for humans. And in fact, it's not even the most powerful one. That actually, like, joy and passion and curiosity and stuff is a much more powerful motivator. And when you let go of the fear that you're trying to drive yourself with as a perfectionist, you don't just become a blob on the couch. You actually, interestingly, become even more motivated and engaged because you allow yourself to be pulled towards something instead of pushed. So I just had to go through this whole process. And I actually did this really interesting thing during lockdown, which was like a group coaching around, oh no, I'm not going to remember his name. Shirzad, I can't think of his last name, but he has this amazing book where he talks about like the parts of the mind that sabotage us. He calls them the saboteurs.
Mm.
Positive intelligence is like the name of his program. And I did this group coaching course around, like, so I was really interested in that as like a model. And he talks a lot about how we all have this incredibly dark, critical judge inside of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so doing that course, it helped me tune in even more to that inner voice that was in me of that really critical perfectionist. And I think that was really helpful to start to finally be able to let go of that. It's still a work in progress, of course, but I do feel like quite a different version of myself these days than I was a few years ago, because I have been able to let that go. So that was a big part of the mindset shift for me. I also started meditating for the first time in lockdown, and I let go of the story that I had that my brain was too busy to meditate. And I just said, right, I'm going to give this a try, and found out that I loved it. And I found that doing guided meditations that prompted you to visualize the future and think about your vision and almost start to like manifest, and in terms of like really getting clarity around what it is you want. I found that to be incredibly useful to build confidence and trust in myself that I could create something like that for myself. So that was really useful. And then I just always say, like I'm so blessed to do this work with clients, because every conversation I have with a client is a reminder for me of those principles, and it allows me to continue building my own awareness and understanding of these principles and skills. So even through doing the work, you're also developing yourself, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Every client is a teacher.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. I was at therapy. I've been going maybe the last couple of months because of the coaching work. I want to make sure that I'm what you would say is like as clean an instrument as I can be for conversations. And perfectionism wasn't the thing that come up for me, but you could say it's linked to that, because again, it's back to fear. And in a uncertain world where we literally don't know what's going to happen in the next moment, we put in place these controls, or like you were saying, expectations versus the reality. Like the expectations give us a element of certainty or confidence in a world that is uncertain, because it's really hard to be in an uncertain or unknown space, because the feelings that brings up, like you're saying, are those negative ones. And so she said, more or less, and it's back to why I said it's all bullshit. All of these things that give us that feeling of certainty or confidence, when we like let them go or open us up to the world, you won't experience the negative, because you won't be arguing with reality. You'll just be accepting life as it is. And the difference in that, no doubt for you and for me, like I absolutely can see the benefit of some of those stories that keep us caged in. And when we let them go, it's so powerful.
Yeah, it is life changing, actually. Even if that sounds a bit corny, like in that case, I think that's one of those shifts you can make, that because it fundamentally shifts the way you see yourself. And I think that's a journey a lot of us struggle with, the journey to accepting ourselves as we are. Part of that model that I learned from my mentor, in the expectations, is he explains it as that we have this huge spectrum of who we are. On one end of the spectrum, there's the like fabulous, amazing Annika who nails it and is fantastic and is her very best self. And then there's this other side of the spectrum where you're just like a complete bozo and you like forget things and you mess up and you're mean to your friend, and like in reality, we are that whole spectrum. And so we have to accept that, and we have to say that on some days we're going to be that amazing, totally on point version of ourselves. Other days we're going to be the bozo, and then other days we're going to be somewhere in between. And so you have to accept that. You have to accept the full breadth of who you are, in order to break out of the cycle of beating yourself up for being anything other than perfect, and shift the expectation away from this is who I need to be towards this is who I am. Let's just make sure I'm always learning and trying to improve upon the parts of myself that I'm, that could have areas for growth, essentially.
Yeah. There's a really good book called No Bad Parts. So it's a similar kind of thing, that we contain
Yeah.
multiple versions of who we are. And
Yeah.
like that, the self-sabotage or the people that hold us back, or the parts of us that hold us back,
Yeah.
there's always a positive intent. And normally,
Yeah.
like you're saying, on that spectrum, we push away the dark,
Yeah.
where actually it's just being open to understanding the intent behind why it's there and what it does to serve you. And it always is from a positive intent. It's
Yeah.
always keeping you safe,
Yeah.
but safe isn't growth. So yeah, I love that. So what were some of the, as you look back and you've gone through the cave and in those dark times, and you've done those things to kind of mentally kind of keep you moving forward, but in a state where you're able to kind of think about the future, what are some of the kind of lessons that you've learned then from that kind of cycle so far that have kind of stood to you or stand out the most?
Big lesson is just that like I am capable of I suppose, okay, I was gonna say I'm capable of building a business, but it's bigger than that. I suppose it's like I really learned that I'm capable of of doing what I set my mind to. And I believed that about myself on certain levels in the past. But this helped me dig deeper into that belief and recognize that I could, yeah, like I can do it. Whatever it is, like whatever it is that I set my mind to. Um, and so that was a really cool lesson internally. I also learned, again, how incredibly important it is to surround I guess that environment piece, like to surround yourself with the people who light that fire in you, and who inspire you with their actions and their knowledge, to always be learning from people. Like there's just so much knowledge, everything that, and I suppose I kind of learned this from Dave too. He used to always say to me, like, I didn't come up with any of this stuff. I just learned it from other people and shaped it in a way that made sense to me and passed it on. We're always just passing on knowledge. So just, yeah, that lesson of constantly seeking out knowledge, never having this idea that you're going to get to this point where you suddenly know it all, that you could ever get to the point where you suddenly know it all, and not attaching your worth as a coach or a business owner to that idea of knowing it all. But just saying, I'm just going to be in this constant state of learning my entire life. And that's wonderful. And that's the best possible place to be in. Was a really good lesson. Yeah, to ask for help sooner rather than later. And again, that's a really wonderful thing that comes out of letting go of perfectionism, because as a perfectionist, you have this expectation, that feeling that if you ask for help, you're exposing yourself as like the person who doesn't know, or who isn't qualified or talented or smart enough to do it. And so when you let go of that and you shift into what's called like a mastery focus, which is less, perfectionism is all about protecting your ego at the end of the day, right? It's what we recognize. And so when you shift away from that ego focus and into a mastery focus, you're engaging with the process of improvement and learning. And so from that focus, asking for help makes total sense, because your ultimate goal is just to keep getting better and learn more.
Nice.
Right. And so, if you think about two different people struggling with something, someone in an ego focus is going to be like, okay, I just have to keep figuring, I'm gonna have to, it's like the swan analogy, right? I need to make everything look fine above the water, and I'm going to furiously work myself to figure this out and make it look like I've got this, right? Whereas someone with the mastery focus who's struggling with something is immediately going to go, what's going on here? Like, excuse me, what do you think's happening here? Like, who's a teacher who can help me understand this better? Like, what do I need to do? Is there a book I can read? Like, who do I need to talk to? Right? They're going to immediately be like, I don't know what's happening. That's fine. That's not attached to my worth. So I'm just going to go out there and find the information. So that's been a huge lesson too, right? Like and that's about identity and mindset as well, and embodying that in a way that helps you just keep moving forward and enjoying the process too. So yeah, there's been a lot of lessons. I wonder even if I'm forgetting some key ones here, but those are the ones that really come to mind.
Maybe a different way to ask the same question as well is, what advice would you give yourself when you were starting out?
Yeah, I would say ask for more help. Like if I go back earlier on, I would have talked to way more people, way more people. I would have, like right from the get-go, I would have been out there like talking. I would say go out, talk to every athlete you could possibly know, start asking them about their, mental stuff, start asking them what they do, go out and find more sports psychologists to talk to beyond just Dave. For a long time, I just kind of stayed in this comfort zone of just talking to Dave and just kind of in the comfort zone of my own sport and equestrian sport. And I don't think I had the confidence I always had this story of like, I don't know enough yet.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't done all the schooling yet. I can't go talk to someone about their mental skills because I don't know enough about it yet, and that really kept me stuck. I didn't do that for a long time. So yeah, I'd say go back, ask for help, talk to more people, collect that knowledge, let go of any concept of your image and how you want to be perceived, right? Like, and just pursue the knowledge, pursue the learning, pursue the mastery of this. And I did get there eventually, but it took a little while. And I would say also, yeah, that piece around look at the big picture of what you're trying to do, recognize that the work of being a performance coach is only one wedge of the pie, that actually there's to support that. There's a lot of other skills you need to develop around running a business and starting a business. And so start learning about that, start accumulating knowledge and support with that sooner. I think those would be the main things. And also I would just say to myself, like, don't worry, it's going to be fine. Like you can do it. 'Cause there's just so much, I just carried so much worry for so many years, I think, about whether or not I was going to be able to do it.
Yeah. It's a constant companion of a creative person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And most people.
And most
probably
people,
probably just everyone.
Yeah. One of my best friends at home, she always says, like, she's like, yeah, I didn't know what you were doing for the longest time. She was like, you were telling me about the sports psychology thing. She's like, I wasn't sure if it was going to work out for you because I didn't really know what it was. And now she's always like, it just blows my mind. She's like, I feel like you just made up a job for yourself. Now you're doing it.
Nice.
Like, it's so cool.
I need to figure out what job I want to make up then. That's next on the list. I love that.
Right? Like, why not? Like, and that's what that's the amazing part of the world we live in today, that you can kind of do that. You can make up a job for yourself and back yourself and go do it. And I'm still kind of doing that. I'm still making up the next evolution of what I want this work to look like, right?
And have you been home to your family since this journey has kind of taken place over the last 2 years?
Yeah, so I've been back to Canada 3 times since the pandemic started, and I was there just before it started as well. I've been lucky enough to be able to go home for kind of longer chunks of time and work from there and develop some client relationships and work there as well. And yeah, it's always a mixture. It's always a really mixture of emotions, I suppose, going home, certainly.
How do you show up there differently?
I think to be able to go home as someone with a career and a business is a wonderful thing. It gives me confidence in myself. For a long time, because I went back to school, so I started back to university at age 22, which is so young, but at the time felt so old because everyone else was basically finished, right? Like most people finish at age 22 in Canada, because it's usually a 4-year degree, and they might go at like 18, right? So 22, they're graduating, and I was just starting on this 4-year journey of getting my undergraduate, knowing that then I had to do a master's afterwards, and and then so at the time I felt so behind everybody else, and I think maybe I carried a little bit of shame around that, like I hadn't figured out my life at the same pace as other people. For a long time, a lot of my close friends and I were working in like the service industry in Victoria, British Columbia, which is a great thing to do in your 20s in Canada because you make quite a bit of money in tips. And you're able to live like quite a good lifestyle. Doing that, it's really social, it's really fun. So for a while, all of us were doing that. I was doing that through my schooling. But then as I got to the end of my sort of last 2 years of my degree, a lot of my friends started shifting into more like stable long-term careers. And again, I had this really strong feeling of, oh my God, I'm behind. Everyone's starting their careers. I still have another 2 years of undergraduate and then this master's to do before I can even start, And so it's a relief sometimes to feel like I've caught up, even though I realize that's sort of all in your head. But it's nice to be able to show up and be out of that phase of figuring out and into the phase of doing, and to be able to share that with my friends and family and share what I'm doing and what my work is. I get a lot of joy from that. It's a really wonderful experience.
Nice.
Yeah.
And when you think about heroes, what qualities do you think make people heroes?
I think a willingness to live with uncertainty, and because you have to do that to grow and push forward. So a willingness to embrace uncertainty maybe and see the possibility in that. The ability to just keep choosing how we see the world and how we see ourselves in a way that is good and joyful and full of hope and possibility. And my mom always says, like, choose to see the sparkles, because they're always there, but there's also a darkness. But if you can just keep choosing to see the sparkles, and she's really, really good at that. So maybe I learned a bit of that from her too. But I think that that's something that I've always been reasonably good at in my life, like choosing to see the joy. And I just think it's so important because, at any given moment, it's not that the darkness isn't there, and it's not even about ignoring the darkness, but it's just choosing to see the sparkles and then living your life from that place and tackling the darkness from that place, I think is so important. Otherwise we just get stuck and we don't try, we don't move then without that choice. And then I really think like that, that sometimes maybe we think about the hero's journey as a solitary journey, but for me, it's never solitary. It's always about the people that you meet along the way, the people you bring with you, and the people who literally carry you sometimes over through different parts of it. And so I think it's about leaning into those connections, building trust, asking for help, accepting help, and recognizing that you're always in this back and forth with the people in your life of either receiving inspiration and help or giving inspiration and help, and that it's just really this beautiful cycle. And so just embracing that and not holding this story of I have to do it all on my own, or and that that to be vulnerable or ask for help is weakness. I really like Brené Brown's stuff around vulnerability being the bravest thing we can do. I think that really resonates for me. So yeah, so I think that's part of it anyway.
Amazing. And it relates back to the no bad parts. So
Yeah.
when you're vulnerable, you're owning the parts of you that other people you might think other people will make you feel insecure about.
Yeah.
But actually, when you honor them and be brave with those vulnerabilities or insecurities and those parts of you, well, then nothing can bother you.
Yeah. Yeah. You become, what's the book? Unfuckwithable. Or who talks about that? Vishen Lakhiani talks about that. He's the CEO of Mind Valley, to becoming unfuckwithable.
Yeah. I love it. I love it.
Another thing too, I think actually is the willingness to be really, really honest with yourself. And that's something that I think it took me a while to learn. And not just on honesty in terms of not lying to yourself, but honesty in terms of actually listening to what you really want and listening to your intuition, listening to what your body or your gut is telling you. Because I think it's a form of self-dishonesty when you ignore that.
Yeah. And
I was really bad for ignoring that in different areas of my life for a long time. That inner knowing or whatever you want to call it. So right now that's one of my big jobs with myself, or big commissions with myself, is to really pay attention to and then actually try to act on that inner knowing, or that what my body is telling me. And I feel like that's a process of becoming more honest with yourself. That's really challenging sometimes, actually, but really necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's something that I talked to my therapist about the last time, is about
Mhm.
I didn't know how to tune into my emotions.
Yeah.
So we did an exercise and she's like, yeah, you know what you're doing. You got it. Don't worry, keep going. Because I thought, again, it's like a knowing, but the knowing is actually like a emotional feeling in your body.
Yeah.
So it's tuning into that and noticing it. And I notice if I have too
Yeah.
much coffee, I can't.
Mm-hmm.
So there's different things like
Totally.
that
Yeah.
will um dilute your ability to pay attention to it.
Yeah.
But I think it's the best relationship you'll ever develop is the one with yourself.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. And just trusting in that there is, I think it's hard for us in our like modern sciencey world to to trust something like intuition because it feels so intangible. There is, I think, what's so cool about neuroscience now, which is showing that we literally have brain cells in our gut, is 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 now the science maybe catching up to that a little bit and
Mm.
adding a bit of like scientific clout to the notion of of like listening to your gut or listening to your that inner feeling. But it's just something that I've kind of proven to myself through experience because it's always right. And I eventually come around to acknowledging, at times in my life where I've like really ignored it because what it was telling me was something really scary that involved leaving something big or leaving a relationship or moving to another country or whatever it was. Like it was easier to ignore that because it was scary to listen and act on what that knowing was telling me. But it's always been right. So I think it's a fascinating thing to tune into and pay attention to. And it's helping me feel more confident in the choices that I make, even if I, which is something I used to always really struggle with. Um, so if you can tune into that and listen to that and place some sort of trust in that and act on that, then there's a funny feeling of confidence and stability that comes with that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Was there any questions I didn't ask you that I should have?
Mm, no, I don't think so. No, it was, I mean, I hope it was an okay chat. It was it's an interesting experience to just like with any of these conversations. I think being asked questions about yourself is such a gift because it gives you the opportunity to just reflect, which is actually really, really wonderful. And it reminds me of the power of the coaching conversation and how just having that opportunity to answer questions about yourself can really increase your own self knowing, which is really neat. So thank you for this opportunity. It's been really lovely.
You're welcome. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask me?
Yeah. I'd love to ask you actually your thoughts on it, just because I was interested in what you said there about asking your therapist about how to get in touch with intuition. Is so my question is your interest in intuition a new thing that's come to you, or has it been something that you've felt or been interested in for a long time?
I think what I've noticed and what's probably driving the interest is a unknowing of my intuition.
Okay, yeah.
And what I reckon has happened to me over time is I've been conditioned to live up to an expectation from an environment that I'm in.
Hmm.
And so I've lost any of the kind of intuition of who I actually am.
Mm,
So what I'm trying to do is like counterbalance that now and go back away from the conditioning external and try and understand more the internal,
mm,
because I think I've lost sight of it. And I want to try and make sure that it's not conditioning, it's what I actually value or think or believe or want to act on. So it's probably been going on a couple of years, my curiosity with it, but only I guess recently, now that I've started going to therapy, and I have 2-3 coaches that I'm working with as well. And like I'm trying to again refine who I am, but refining isn't always adding. It's not always adding stuff. It's sometimes just letting go of other parts. So I'm trying to let go of the conditioning of who I thought I needed to be. For example, I stopped wearing a tie when I was going to work out of defiance, because if my value is determined by whether or not I wear a tie, not for me. Right? So I deliberately, I remember taking it off and saying, I'll never put that on again for work. And I won't. And then it goes to the opposite end, where I have friends who take CEOs up the mountains in flip-flops and bare feet and sea dip with them. So like, it's all just made up.
Yeah.
And I want to try and tune into what I want to make up.
Yeah, because if it is all made up, then we get to make it up for ourselves.
100%.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So that's some of the driving.
Yeah. Very cool.
And maybe just to round us off by saying thank you. I appreciate your energy. I think you are I always feel better after talking to you. I always feel like I've learned something. I always feel like I have more to learn. And I just always feel a little bit, I don't want to say lighter. I don't think lighter is the word. I think it's just I benefit from your light, if that makes sense. So I just appreciate that about you and just wanted to make sure to share that. So Annika McGivern, thanks for being on the Everyday Heroes podcast. Thank you. What a lovely thing to say. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I really deeply enjoy our conversations as well. Looking forward to all the fun projects that we're conspiring on at the moment. Lots to come. Likewise. Thank you. Thank you.